done. I'm sitting over there, so.
Yes, it's just that you will not be the first one to stand. I will see if I remember. If I don't remember to put it there, you do it yourself.
I do.
I don't know if it will like mix the voice.
Maybe it's gonna be bad.
That's what
Let's shut them down.
Yeah.
Later.
Just press, yeah.
Can I please request everybody into the black blocks and take your seats, please? Please find your seats. I think maybe we can switch off the music now. Thank you. Good morning again. And welcome to the session of the first of of this kind of session on the second day of the 2023 KEC General Assembly in beautiful Tallinn. I hope you have already had the opportunity to walk the streets of the old city. That's really nice. Who walked to the church yesterday? I'm not going to ask who didn't. But if you didn't, you should go to the old town and have a look. It's very pretty. This is the second day, as I said. It is also our second keynote speaker this morning, Professor Dr. Hartmut Rosa. I will not introduce him because I got someone to do that for me. But I will just mention again, repeat, that these keynote addresses are like building blocks for our deliberations and our discussions. Yesterday we had the political framework of Europe, concretized in the speech by Mrs. Tsikhanouskaya. I said that I think that made a very good foundation for what we're going to do the next few days. Today we will look more into the sociological context of Europe as our next building block for the reports that will be taking shape over the next few days. So keep that in mind, what you hear now and the questions that you are able to ask afterwards, and the answers we will get will be, as I said, building blocks in the ongoing work of KEC. Before we start with the keynote address, however, I would like to call on stage Dr. Reverend Irenaeus Lucas from the Lutheran World Federation, and you would like to greet us this morning, so please.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's a joy to be here. Thank you for the invitation to attend this assembly. As Regional Secretary for Europe in the Lutheran World Federation, I have a privilege to greet you all on behalf of the LWF General Secretary, Reverend Dr. Anne Burkhardt, and I would like to read her greetings. Honorable KEC President, Reverend Christian Krieger, KEC General Secretary, Dr. Jürgen Skov-Sørensen, Your Eminence Metropolitan Stephanos, Metropolitan of Tallinn and all Estonia, Your Eminence Archbishop Urmas Vilma, Archbishop of Estonian Evangelical Lutheran Church, sisters and brothers in Christ. Please receive cordial greetings for the 2023 Assembly of the Conference of European Churches from the Lutheran World Federation, the worldwide communion of altogether 150 Lutheran churches. I very much hoped I could bring the greetings to you personally at this assembly, as this assembly takes place in the city that has a special place in my heart, having been my hometown for many years. As 2023 is an assembly year for the Lutheran World Federation as well, I unfortunately will not be able to be in Tallinn in person, as I'm currently attending the LWF Asia pre-assembly in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. The times in which you are gathering are not the easiest for Europe, with the war raging on the continent, with polarization causing deep rifts in the society, and with many people seeking for orientation in their lives. However, there is a saying that there is not a better time to be the church than today. It is today that we are called to proclaim the good news and to share hope. Hope is not the same as optimism. Václav Havel, a former dissident and the president of the Czech Republic after the end of the Cold War, once said, "Hope, in its deep and powerful sense, is not the same as joy that things are going well, or as willingness to invest in enterprises that are obviously headed for early success, but rather an ability to work for something because it is good. And the more uncompromising the situation in which we demonstrate hope, the deeper the hope. The churches are called to be messengers of hope, of peace and reconciliation, not only to the church members, but also to the wider society. Your assembly theme, Under God's Blessing, Shaping the Future, calls churches to actively participate in God's holistic mission, helping to shape a future for Europe, but also beyond. Participating in God's holistic mission means a call to churches to be active in the public space. The Church in the Public Space, a study document that the Lutheran World Federation issued in 2016, and which is very much actual also today, talks about the ABCDE of this engagement, calling the churches to A, assess public issues in a participatory way, to build B, relationships of trust, to C, challenge injustice, to D, discover signs of hope, and E, empower people in need. I believe that the CEC is very well positioned to do important advocacy work in Europe on behalf of its member churches, but also to continue with sincere efforts for Christian unity. It is not the time to concentrate on what divides us as Christians, but on what unites us. I wish you fruitful deliberations and many joyful moments together with your sisters and brothers from other parts of Europe. May you be blessed so that you may be a blessing to others through your witness and service. Reverend Dr. Anne Burkhardt, General Secretary of the Lutheran World Federation. And last but not least, I would like to show you this little booklet with pictures. This is about the LWF Ukraine response. Ukraine has been mentioned many times already during this meeting, and you can find this book at the reception desk if you are interested. Thank you very much for your attention. God's blessings.
Thank you, Dr. Lucas, and thank you to the LWF. I will now leave the floor to the moderator of this session, Jonas Hellermann. So
Yeah,
the
thank
floor
you.
is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to moderate this very special panel where we will have a keynote speaker and thereafter two respondents, and thereafter we will have around 10 to 15 minutes to discuss the issues and the topics, and then we also have time for your questions. So I hope it's going to be interesting. And the keynote speaker is a professor of sociology from Germany, Mr. Hartmut Rosa, who's very well known by his analysis of modernity or modern world. Such famous concepts as alienation, for example, is something you are working with. And more interesting is, I think, your kind of a counter concept, or the concept which should be a kind of a therapy for all the evils of this modern world, and this concept is resonance, the Begriff der Resonanz, as you say it in Germany. So we really wait for your speech, but before you start, I want to just briefly introduce you to respondents. After the keynote speak, we will have two respondents who will present their arguments or counter arguments, and first there will be Bishop Kari from the Church of Norway, and secondly Professor Peter Kratochvil from the Evangelical Church of Czech. So this is our form, and now Professor Rosa, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. I think I will simply use this microphone, or I hope it works. Yeah. So thanks a lot for the kind introduction and for the invitation here to this, to Tallinn. I've never been in Estonia, so that's a great pleasure, but it's also a great pleasure, of course, to be at this conference and this meeting. I always like to do a sociology which is not just confined to itself. I think if as a sociologist or a social philosopher, right, you only stay within the university and the academic realm, you really cannot do your job very well, right? I want to do a sociology which engages with actually with all kinds of people, but I found it's almost a coincidence, or I didn't know it, but I found out that my thinking, as you mentioned, the concept of resonance, for example, I have to speak slow here, I'm sorry. I kill the translators. My concepts of resonance, or what I use, there's a German concept, Unverfügbarkeit, often translated as uncontrollability, but they are all actually theological concepts. So talking with people from different church contexts has proven to be extremely inspiring for me. So this is really a wonderful opportunity, and I think I will learn a lot here. I'm pretty optimistic. Right? So, and I want to talk about Europe. And actually what I want to present to you is that I think there are, so to speak, I will show you I want to move in 5 steps. And my idea is that there are two versions of Europe at hand, right? One maybe is the version we live in, right? It's a Europe defined by economic success, technological success, by acceleration and growth in particular, right? But it has a lot of problematic downsides, right? I will actually claim that we are probably coming to an end of that social formation. But I believe that Europe also has the power, the concepts, the ideas, the possibilities and practices for a different version of Europe. And that's, as you just heard, a resonant Europe. Europe as a space of resonance. This would really be my hope and my dream. And I think the different churches in Europe might exactly be the motors, or some, maybe the most important motors, at least some motors, to kind of realize a resonant Europe. Right, so I will start with a few brief preliminary remarks on the two versions. Then that's version 1, is what I call dynamic stabilization, states or a social formation, as I call it, a society which can only stabilize itself, reproduce itself by permanently growing, accelerating and innovating, and this leads to problems, and therefore we need version 2, Europe as a space of resonance. I will, of course, introduce the resonance concept at this point, and then briefly point out my, if you so like, new vision of Europe. And I think, what I think is really important in political respects, I do believe, and I think you coming from church backgrounds, religious backgrounds, will probably agree to this. I believe we cannot do politics simply in a mode of antagonism, right? Some of my colleagues think that politics is about struggle and conflict, right, and reaching compromises between the different groups of interests and sections of society and so on. But I think we somehow should not give up the idea of even a we. And this is not in my manuscript, but I want to briefly talk about it anyway. You know, in sociology and even in political discourse, people often say we cannot say we because there is no we. Right? You cannot say we in Estonia because you have very different groups of people, right? Some are old, some are young, some might be immigrants, some might be Estonian, and we know there are different groups in Estonia too. So there is no we, and I think that's wrong, right? I mean, we can talk about this conference. You could also say there is no we. There is this church and that church. There are women and men, and I don't know. Yes, but the we consists of the diversity. Nevertheless, sometimes, you know, the we is kind of, it's dynamically constituted in the task at hand, right? So I think we need a conception of the we, and I will briefly present the vision of this common good. And the we, so to speak, has to find the idea of common good. And then I will end with a few ideas why I think that the churches and that religion is important for this. So I have to, now I have the double task of hurrying up and speaking slow, right? Let's see whether I can do this. So the first thing is really, I really believe, if you so like, I believe in Europe, right? I really think, I would even wish the unification process of Europe going on and going stronger, because like Brexit, of course, was a very bad fallback, in my view, because if you go back to the nation-state levels, then you will have competition and in the end maybe even struggle and war between nation-states, and this cannot be the solution for Europe, it cannot be the solution for the world. It will just make us powerless in a world in which Europe is a province anyway, and lead to devastating states. And it's, but this I find really important. I'm not sure where Europe is going, but for me it's really of crucial importance that, so I believe in a strong, unified Europe. It's a we of different voices, right? We don't have to lose our own voice, Estonian, Lithuanian, whatever, right? But nevertheless, we constitute a we, right? And politically, I think Europe is very important. But it should not be a weapon against the others, right? We should not think of Europe as a fortress against the Chinese and maybe the Russians or the Middle East and the Middle Eastern powers and the United States. We need to be a part of a we. I really think we need to come to the point where we think of the we as the world. We living on this planet, that's a we too, right? And we have to talk to each other and to create even a resonant world, because the problems of our time clearly are global, right? The problems of the 21st century are global problems. I mean, we already live in a global world, so it's pointless to think of Europe as a closed sphere. Why? The climate crisis clearly is global. I mean, really, I really want politicians, current politicians, to tell me how they even dream of overcoming the climate crisis when we think we have to go into conflict with China and with India maybe, and with the Middle East and probably with the US, or not with the US, I don't know. But if you think of this world, the Western world against the Eastern world, then we will lose out and the planet will be destroyed. I'm pretty sure about this. I'm 100% sure about it, right? The climate crisis is global. Financial markets are pretty global today. The media spheres are global. If you think of, the internet, it's very hard to block out the other voices there. And we have global forms of inequality because the economy is intertwined on a global scale. And things like COVID, which we just faced, are global too. Right, so really we have to think. I mean, I'm not a fan of China, and I'm not a fan even of Chinese thinking. But this Cao Tingyang book, you might know, right? Everything, all under the heaven, I think it's called. That we had come to think of the world, right, as a diverse we of the world. This, for me, is very important. But now let's turn to Europe, right? So as I said, I'm not dreaming of turning Europe into a strong fortress or a weapon against the others, right? But as I said, it should be a sphere of resonance, and the core idea of resonance is a mode of listening and responding, right? And the response is important. I don't want to say Europe should simply be open or even get diffused in the global power. No, we should kind of try to develop our own voice, strengthen the own voice, but even democracy, very often people think democracy is about everyone having a voice, but actually this only works if everyone has ears too, right? And therefore my idea is that Europe should have a voice and ears, listening and responding to the others and to the world in total. And I will point this out in a second more clearly. Now, what is defining Europe? I really think in the end, it's a European model we live by almost on a global scale now, right? I call this is my sociological analysis. We live in a structural system, in an economic system, which is defined by the mode of dynamic stabilization. What I mean with this is, it's important for me to think about this. My first book was on Charles Taylor, you might know from a theological background. But my second book is called Social Acceleration. What is defining Europe, the European model of living in this world, right? Is its speed, if you so like, right? That we don't stay where we are. We are permanently producing growth, for example, right? And wealth with it. We are permanently accelerating and innovating, right? And this is very different from all the other social systems we've known before, because they normally social systems try to stabilize itself, right? Think of a medieval social structure and institution. They try to prevent change. The world should stay stable as it always was. And the goal of the economy, basically everywhere before the modern European model, right, was was geared towards producing what we need, right? A Bedarfsdeckend in Max Weber's term, right? Trying to satisfy the needs. So the economy needs to produce enough food to survive the winter, shelter, housing, clothes. But when this is achieved, and also what you need for the service in the temple, for example, or in the church. But when this is achieved, you stop, right? And the European model is such that we permanently need to innovate, accelerate, grow in order to keep what we have, right? So my claim is not that only Europe is growing or accelerating or innovating. That would be rubbish, right? I mean, the Greeks did, the Egyptians did, the Babylonians did, sometimes grow, accelerate, and innovate. But what is really new is that we needed to stay where we are. So if you think of the big countries in Europe, but also, I mean, it might still be a little different in the Baltic countries, for example, right? Because growth, I think, might make more sense here than in Germany, for example. But, you know, our German government insists that we need growth, right? Now ask, where do you want to grow in? We should produce more cars because Germany is a car-producing country, and more trucks. And that's exactly what they try to do. Volkswagen and Mercedes and BMW and Porsche, they all want to produce and sell more cars, bigger cars, faster cars. Right? And that's not a good idea overall if you think of it ecologically. Producing more cars and trucks is idiotic. Another form of growth, which has really been the main growth sector globally, one of the two main growth sectors, is producing more airplanes, increasing air traffic. Ecologically, that's idiotic, as you know, right? So another field which has been really growing is producing more computers and smartphones, right? We exchange them every 2 years anyway, so we should exchange them every year, right? But that's not a solid form of living in this planet. I could go on for hours, but I'm not given hours. So I'll stop here and want to say, so we need growth not because we don't have enough food. We are already obese, right? And I mean, there are people hungry in the world, right? And I'm definitely not against the growth of the food sector, let's say in Africa also. But the problem is that with this European model, those who can afford buying the surplus food, right? Those who can afford buying it, who can pay it, they are already obese. It's really interesting to see what the food industry does, right? They try, you know, I have to make this point, right? To see why I think this European model, I really, let's say it bluntly, I think it's idiotic, right? Look, our food industries need to grow. Those who can afford to buy the food, actually, they are not hungry. They don't need to eat more next year than they eat this year. So what does the food industry do? I mean, they have to do it. I mean, I'm not blaming them. It's the logic of the system. They insert certain enzymes and other substances in the food, which are very efficient. They stop, they break, interrupt the signal from the stomach to the brain, because normally when you eat and you are full, you have enough. The stomach tells the brain, stop, I'm full. But you can somehow kill that signal. Then you keep eating even though you're already full, right? You know that this happens when you eat French fries or chips or something of this sort. So what I want to say, that the point is not, I think it's not an ideological point. It's a sociological point. The point is this: we live in a system which needs to grow, to speed up and to innovate, to create disruptive change, just in order to stay the same, because without this growth, in Germany, in England, in France, in Sweden, in Estonia, in Europe, in China, in Russia, everywhere, right? Without this growth, the whole system breaks down, because you will have a high rate of unemployment, but also companies close down. That's the first part. But then the state's budget is shrinking, so you cannot really politically do anything. But what much worse, you cannot pay the old age pension schemes, you cannot pay the healthcare sectors, you cannot pay the cultural sectors, the educational sectors, even the churches. So this is what defines Europe in version 1, if you so like, right? Next year, right? I mean, the point is this: you might be very exhausted, maybe close to burnout today. But the message I have to you is, next year you will have to run faster. Right? No matter how problematic it already is, that's the logic of the European model. And you see, it's ambivalent. It's good on the one hand because it has given us economic wealth. I'm not denying this. It has given us spectacular scientific progress and so on. And also, it's also connected to democratic freedom. But the problem with it is that there is no limit to it. No matter how much we already produce, right, or how fast we already run. Next year we have to run faster and produce more, and change has to come faster, right? So the consequences of this, I already said, it's an escalatory logic of operation. It's never enough, and when you have, even if you have a very moderate growth rates of 1% or so, within 20 years, you have to more than double the whole output of value which has been created, right? So you get escalatory curves of speed and of growth. And my idea is, and now it becomes theological and important, right? That this leads to a certain form of being in the world and being to the world, of living a life, you could say. And my claim is that it leads to a form of aggression. Right? The basic, it's even in our bodies, right? When you wake up in the morning, how do you wake up? You do not wake up because the sun comes up or the church bells ring, for example, right? But because your alarm clock rings, right? I think it's not an accident that it's called alarm clock. You are alarmed to the world in the morning. The conference starts, right? Or I have to bring my daughter to the kindergarten, or my son to school, or whatever it is, right? So, and then you can really see it from your to-do list, right? The logic of modern life is that you have an enormous list of things you have to do that day. It might be written or just in your mind. And all day you base a report. I have to call such and such. I have to do something else. I have to pick up my kids. I have to care for whatever it is. It's an enormous list, and you will never be able to, that's the logic of dynamic stabilization. You will never be able to do it all, right? It creates, I call it subjects of guilt, right? In the evening when you go to bed, you did not finish your to-do list, right? Even if you managed to do everything you were supposed to do, you did not pray, or you did not do mindfulness or yoga or relax and so on. So my claim is really, you can see this European model where next year we have to run faster than this year, creates aggression on the macro level, on the ecological level. We are in a state of aggression towards nature, as everyone knows. You see it from the extractive industries, tearing out everything that is in the earth, polluting the atmosphere, heating up the climate. It's an energy problem, right? This logic of more and more and faster creates an energy problem by heating up the atmosphere. On the micro level, it creates also a heat problem. We are burning out from the inside. The data we have on mental health are really quite frightening. Particularly those with young people, with students, for example, right? I mean, it's all over the world. It's interesting. It's from the US, even in the Silicon Valley, to Europe, particularly to Asia. It's incredible. The state of young people in Asia too, but it's the same here, but I think it's even worse there. They are in desperation. The suicide rates are very high. I mean, I recently read a report about young people in Korea, students, for example, university students. They commit crimes, crimes which are quite bad, but not totally bad, but such that they get imprisoned because they say, only when I'm in the cell, I feel free. I mean, you have to contemplate this for a second, right? When I'm in the cell, I feel free. Why? Actually, I think I can explain it perfectly well. My idea is that that Europe Model 1 is about permanently enlarging the horizon. I call it the AAA horizon, namely the horizon of what is available, accessible, attainable, right? So there are millions of things you can do and millions of things you should do, right? And millions of things which it's a kind of flexible thing, and you're always on the wrong side of where you should be. So we have in German a huge Weltreichweite, right? A large horizon of availability, attainability, accessibility. And when you go to prison, this horizon shrinks dramatically. You cannot go to the cinema right now. You cannot even go to the library right now. You cannot call up your friends. And this is felt like a moment of liberation, right? It's the opposite of European Model 1. And I even think, so I have 3 levels. We are in aggression towards nature. We are in aggression towards ourselves. It leads to burnout. It also leads maybe to autoaggressive diseases, right? Autoimmune diseases are kind of on the rise in an enormous level. But it also leads to aggression on the social level. There's very good social data which shows that people start to hate each other enormously. I think this is a crime or problem of this society, right? The others who believe differently, who look differently, who laugh differently, who speak differently are no longer people of a different background. Actually, you know, difference can be very attractive. Tell me how you speak or believe or love, right? It's interesting, listening and answering. But instead of being in a mode of listening and answering, we are in a mode of fighting, right? Shut up, go away, you're an idiot. That's basically what in the US the Republicans tell the Democrats. In Britain, the Remainers tell the Brexiteers. In Germany, the pro-vaccinations call the others. And in Europe, the Russians call the Europeans and the Europeans the Russians, right? So we are in aggression on the micro level towards ourselves. We're never satisfied with ourselves. We are in aggression on the social level and we are in aggression on the ecological level. So I think we're done with this. Let's go to the, I'll leave that out. Otherwise, if anyone wants the PowerPoint slides, I'm happy to share them, right? So how could it be different? I hope you're convinced now that we have a problem, right? So how could it be different? My claim is it can be different. Europe has a different vision and it has a lot to do. Actually, I think it has theological and religious backgrounds, but it also has a strong source in the Romantic era, if you so like, right? Charles Taylor has written a lot of this. And so what we are looking for is a mode of being in the world and being to the world, which is not this mode of aggression, because aggression leads to alienation, right? You experience the world as either indifferent, cold, or even as and silent, but you can even experience the world as hostile, right? So you're either in a repulsive relationship to the world, I struggle it and the world is mean to me, or of indifference. The world out there is mute, silent, cold. Even if I have a huge horizon, you know, I've written a lot on it, and Jonas has already told you on alienation, right? The thing is, even if we have made the world available, attainable, accessible, and particularly when we have come to completely control something, it's very interesting, it turns silent, right? Now I have in Spotify 100 million of titles of music I can listen to, and very often people say, but this is too much. I don't have any urge, right? Any motivation to listen to any of these songs, right? It's like an indifferent mass. And it can be the same with, I could travel to hundreds of places, but I don't feel called, I don't feel connected. Or on Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, I have thousands of friends maybe, or thousands of followers, but I don't really feel connected, in touch. So now what we are looking for is, what is a different mode of being in the world and being to the world? A mode which is not alienated and which is not aggressive. Right? And as you might guess, the opposite to alienation and the opposite to aggression, and therefore a different conception of the good life, is what I call resonance. And it's what I call resonance, because for me it's important, you know, I said in the beginning, structurally, institutionally, Europe is such that we need to grow, accelerate and innovate all the time just to stay where we are. We have to run faster and faster just to stay in place. And by the way, it's very important. Of course, this logic of growth and acceleration and innovation at first was intrinsically tied to the idea of progress, moving forward, right? Of course, the idea was, with economic success, we will overcome scarcity. That is an enormous promise, right? We will no longer have to struggle for survival, for having a place in the world. With the progress of science, we will overcome ignorance. With acceleration, we will overcome time scarcity and almost have an indefinite life before we die, and so on. But today, and therefore, you know, it's not just a philosophical ideology. It was a lived experience of people, because as social data clearly shows, for the last 200 years, parents were driven by the promise, by the belief, by the conviction that they are working hard for their kids to have a better life, right? We work hard, we want to build a house, we want to progress, right? But our kids will have a better life, a freer life, right? It's pacification of existence, which was the promise. But today, from Japan to the United States to Europe, this hope has disappeared. Now everywhere parents say we have to work as hard as possible, to run as fast as possible, to invest as much as possible in our kids, for them to keep what we have. Right? And even keeping what we have is no longer a plausible option. Now most people think, well, it will get worse anyway. The ecological conditions will deteriorate, the economic competition will get harder, and politically we will move into conflict and even war, right? So now, I really think with this European Model 1, we have lost the future. We are now moving towards a better future. And we are even about to lose the past. Because now all of a sudden our past doesn't look as good as we thought it would be, right? The European Enlightenment was tied to imperialism and colonialism of the worst sort. So we need an alternative vision of the good life, and here it is, because otherwise I will be killed by time. I have 15 more minutes, right? But I only started by, okay, 10 minutes. So what is this other form of being, 10 minutes, I realize. So what's the other form of being in the world? You know, I said the mode of aggression is the problem. And I think we know when we dream of a different mode, and when you think of what were the experiences of a good life, what were the real experience, not the vision, the idea, but when did it feel like this is how life should be? And I claim it's modes of resonance, you know, and if you're in resonance with something, you're not in a mode of aggression, right? Actually, think of something like this conference, right? If it was a scientific conference, I would say most of us are in a mode of aggression because you wait for the mistake, right? For the point where you can jump in. Either you refute what the person says, or at least you prove your point, you make your points, right? But resonance is a moment where all of a sudden you get out of this mood because you're touched by something, right? It doesn't have to be the speaker. It might be an idea you come to, or a comment, or someone else in the audience, or something that happens outside this context. But resonance has 4 elements, right? All of a sudden you're in a different form of relating to the world. The first element is affection. Something speaks to you. Something touches you or moves you, right? Can be a piece of music you listen to. You walk through Tallinn, you have to be fast because you're late for the conference, right? And all of a sudden you hear some organ music or whatever it is coming out of a church or some other place. And you have to stand still and you're touched, right? So the first moment of resonance is something speaks to you, something touches you or moves you. And then you don't stay. It's not just a passive experience because you answer it. Right? In some way, if you teach, or if you have to do a sermon in the church, if you preach, right, you know very well what it means to be with a kind of alienated audience, right? So if they are tired, they are playing on their smartphone, they are yawning, or they might even be hostile, right? And you can really see if resonance happens, because maybe you manage to say something which really speaks to the people, their eyes change. You can see it in the eyes. It's no longer the indifferent glance or the hostile glance or the tired glance, but all of a sudden eyes are very good for indicating resonance. And it's not just the eyes, it's also the body. If there's resonance, the bodily posture changes. You move towards it, right? This is why the second element of resonance is emotion, emovere, moving outward, and there you feel self-efficacy. All of a sudden you're connected to the other side, to the world. So if resonance comes through a speech, for example, right, you immediately start to think for yourself, to do something with the idea, maybe to contradict. Resonance is not harmony and unity and fusion. Resonance is something touches you and you respond to it by coming up with your own ideas. And this might be that you reject the ideas, that you go into an argument, right? But resonance is a process, it's a movement, right? Something touches me and I respond to it. And in this process we are transformed. We do not stay the same, right? I like to turn to Hannah Arendt at this point. She says it's the moment of natality, right? Where we don't have to follow the path or the to-do list, if you so like, the chains of interaction. But something new comes in, a new idea, a new thought. And for me, it's very important that this new thought doesn't even have a clear locus, right? Because if natality happens, it certainly is not because, for example, in this case, because I say what I always say. It has to be some response which kind of takes me and you out of the old tracks, right? We come to a new point, a new idea is born in the middle, right in the middle between us. Something new happens, so we are transformed, we are no longer the same. And finally, the fourth point is Unverfügbarkeit in German, the fourth element of resonance. Uncontrollability in English, it's not the perfect translation, but we don't have a better one. So look, you come to a conference like this, I would say, or you go to a museum, to a concert, wherever you go, or to a tourist place, in the hope that you will experience resonance, that something will speak to you, something new will get born. This movement where you feel alive, right, will somehow happen at some point, but you don't know whether it will happen. You might go to a conference and say, well, actually it was boring, right? I can't remember anything that touched and changed me. This might happen. You cannot buy resonance. You know, people go on trips, for example, to see the northern lights, right? The polar lights, right? You can get a guarantee. Take these cruise ships to northern Norway, and we guarantee you will see polar lights. If not, you will get your money back. That's the attempt to buy resonance with nature, right? But maybe you can buy the polar lights, but you cannot buy resonance that this really happens, right? So uncontrollability means you cannot buy or predict when resonance will happen. And very often it happens where you don't expect it. It's in the coffee break, where all of a sudden this person next to you comes up with an idea, with a suggestion that touches you, right? So you don't know where it happens and when it happens. And what is even more interesting, you don't know what the result of such a resonant transformation will be. Right? I said natality, right? Maybe in our discussion we come up with a really interesting idea. It might even change your life or my life, right? But it's absolutely impossible to predict what this new idea will be, right? And of course, if you look at these four elements, and I wasn't aware of it when I came up with it, this is a theological idea, right? Being touched by God, by the grace of God, whatever it is, trying to answer it and being transformed in this process in an unpredictable way, right? So you already see why I think the churches are very interesting for this. But I don't have any more time. So I basically can sum up. Let me go to one I don't know. The idea is that resonances happen along four axes, right? One is between people, like in a conference. The second is, or in a loving relationship or in friendship, it's about resonance, being touched and being capable of reaching out, self-efficacy. But also with things, with objects you deal with materialities, right? With objects of art, but actually with things you work with, we get in this resonant process. Then there is resonance, there should be resonance with yourself, which I think is very important in many contexts. Listening and responding to your body, your psyche, your biography, your memories, right? A lot of church work has to do with that, being in resonance with who you are, right? And it has this element of uncontrollability. But finally, there is what I call the vertical or the existential axis of resonance, because for us as human beings, the existential question is, what lies at the bottom of my existence, at the core of my being in the world? Is it the silent, the hostile universe? Or is it an answering relationship, a relationship of listening and responding? And for me, what religion does is kind of giving us a sense of, at the core of my existence, there is someone who hears me, who sees me, who has called me by my name, who has given me the breath of life. That's an idea of resonance and on the existential line. And for me as a sociologist, God is the symbol, the cipher, right? for this idea that resonance is the heart of my being in the universe and being to the universe. The Bible is a document of shouting, yelling, crying out for there be someone hearing me, seeing me, being connected to me, right? And I'll move to the last to this, right? I'll move to this. It's the document that there is someone, right? It's the primordial moment of being in the world. Therefore, I think as a sociologist, I cannot say, and the Bible is right. How should I say that? I have no idea. Maybe it's completely wrong. My idea is, as human beings, we experience sometimes resonance in the world, kind of existential resonance, right? Where we feel at home in the world. It's not just through the religion. Some people feel it when they are standing at the ocean and the waves roll in. They have this sense of a connection between themselves and even the universe, right? And others experience it in music when they listen to Beethoven, or it might be a heavy metal band, right? I've just written a book on heavy metal, actually, because it's very interesting dealing with resonance in metal. But the idea is, when you listen to music, you feel your innermost reality connected to a speaking, vibrating universe almost, right? But religion and the churches have something very interesting to offer, namely, they have a theology which conceptualizes, puts in ideas, even in a theoretical framework, this sense of being connected to a speaking world. And actually, and I thought, as a sociologist, I don't know whether the universe speaks and responds or whether it's eventually totally silent, right? Because we have these other experiences of utter silence or hostility. You can see it in philosophy by Camus, Albert Camus or Friedrich Nietzsche. It's fantastic philosophy and literature, right? Where they try to give words to the sense that that the universe is not responding. It's cold and silent out there. And and I thought, well, cognitively I can't say which version is right. Is at the bottom of my existence the answering universe or the cold and silent one? But it feels so much better, right, to believe in the answering universe that I would go for this. But now I think that's probably a mistake, because human reality is made up of these both experiences. I would almost say both realities. There is the silence, the hostile, the non-speaking, the non-responding universe or world. But there's also this sense of a speaking, answering reality. And I think we somehow have to keep those two in balance. So if you deny religion, you're only left with a cold, or an equivalent, a functional equivalent for it. And if you insist that the universe is utterly cold and hostile, and it's all about struggle in the sense of Darwin, then you miss out a vital element of existence. But if you insist that the universe is all love and answer, right, then you miss out the other side. And you could actually say that the Bible, for example, has a very strong sense of, think of Hiob. I have no idea what that is in English, right? But there are many stories where we have the silent and the cold universe too. But what I want to say is that I believe, so my idea is, obviously, Europe needs to be a space of resonance, right? We have to recreate resonance, and that means, maybe I go back briefly, resonance between citizens, right? We should no longer encounter each other as idiots and foes and enemies who should be silent because they are traitors or whatever. Then there should be resonance between us and the body politic, right? The institutions from governments to parliaments to churches need to be in a mode of listening and responding. We need to have ears for that too, and we need to be ready for transformation. Yes, I want to be transformed by those who have a different belief and different forms of living, loving, speaking, looking, and so on. And only by this we can kind of overcome the ecological crisis, being in resonance with nature. That means not controlling and dominating it, but it doesn't mean to simply give in to it and listen to it, but being in resonance, listening and responding might sometimes be a no. And that's the case with history too. We need to redevelop an axis of resonance from the past to the future. Listening to the past and devising the future, not by just following for traditions or what we always did, but being in resonance, right? I think this is exactly what we are missing. And we also need to be in resonance with the outer world, because if we are not, then we are. If you say yes, let's create Europe as a space of resonance, but those outside should be silent. Let's have a strong Frontex and kill all the migrants, or I don't care who produces my t-shirts in Bangladesh. If you take that position, you can really see, you know, I always say if someone says, I want these migrants out, it's their own fault. Then look at my hand, look at my face, look at my voice, look at my eyes. It's closure, right? It's hostility. If this is your stance to the world, if this is Europe to the world, we cannot be as resonant on the inside, right? Resonance is a disposition, listening. In German, we have the word aufhören. It doesn't just mean to stop. It means listening up and being touched. And this is the Europe I wish for. And now I'm really, oh, that was too fast. I like that image. Now they stopped me, but I don't need it. One more point, because I really, one minute, less than a minute. I think the churches do not only have the theology, they have the spaces of practice where you can develop this sense of resonance. When you enter a church, you do this, even if you're a non-believer, the bodily posture is different than from when you enter the shopping center or the supermarket, right? In the church, it's physically, it's a different relationship. It's this listening and responding. And you have practices like praying. I'm a sociologist, I'm not a theologian, right? If you pray, you're turning inward and outward at the same point. It's this axis, right? Which you kind of practice, which you kind of embody, connecting the innermost reality to the outermost reality. And this is why I think the churches do have a strong role to play in creating a resonant Europe. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for this resonating presentation. Now I really hope that the clock is also resonating with us and is giving us some more minutes to discuss all these elements you just presented. So first, the respondents and the Bishop Kari from Norway, please.
Dear friends, dear Dr. Hartmut Rosa, thank you so much for this opportunity to listen to such an interesting lecture. And especially thank you for challenging me to respond to it. As I was preparing this response, the lecture was forwarded to me in German language. My German is not very good. And as I find myself to be living in the reality where time seems to be increasingly scarce, the to-do list is very long. The thought of reading 18 pages of German made me somewhat desperate. But then I discovered the joy of artificial intelligence. Microsoft Word translated Dr. Rosa's Microsoft Word translated Dr. Rosa's script within a minute. And then a friendly-sounding lady read it out to me in singing Norwegian, while I got the time to weed and water my plants at the same time. Hyperacceleration is thus experienced reality, and I place myself in the midst of the sense of life and reality that, according to Dr. Rosa, applies to Europeans in general, and which he describes through the concepts of acceleration, alienation, and resonance. For in a strange way, I experience both the frightening aspect of accelerated and alienated reality. I was somewhat shaken by the thought of translators now losing the time it takes to slowly and carefully translate important texts. And at the same time, I experienced how the words that were read out to me by this artificial voice actually called me, made me listen, inwards, outwards, and upwards. And mysteriously, I felt connected to Europeans and to Dr. Rosa, and I was moved by the hope that you lift up in a time in Europe marked by spiritual impoverishment and loss of meaning. It became a resonant moment. For even in Norway, this small, wealthy, happy country on the outskirts of Europe that still maintains some growth and progress, statistics show that we too share what Dr. Rosa describes as the common European sense of life. It won't go well for much longer. It won't go well for much longer. And in addition to this, or as a result of the unresonant life, I am not happy anymore. Perhaps many are unable to put into words what exactly is wrong in my life, but I believe it is often experienced as an undefinable sense of loss, grief over something that is gone, something important that we used to have but have lost sight of. The Church of Norway, the church I belong to, is right in the middle of a major change that to many also is perceived as a series of losses. We are no longer a state church, and we have lost both privilege and power. Norway, like many other states of Europe, is now a multicultural and multi-religious society, and there is no longer an automatic connection between being Norwegian and being a member of the Church of Norway. If the Church now keep clinging to our history, the pulpit, the Bible, and the confessions, and do everything we can to try to bring back earlier days, or at least preserve things as they are now, give the same answers, expect the same response, we will keep losing at an accelerating pace. That is my claim. So I concur with what I understand to be one of Dr. Rosa's claims regarding the Church. The Church can play an important role now and for the future if she stops being moralistic, giving ready-made answers, and telling people what to think and what not to think. I understand and support Dr. Rosa's point that the Church can offer different holy rooms and religious practices that calls upon people to pause and reconnect. Resonant opportunities. In addition to this, I believe the Church can contribute a companionship to people in dealing with their feeling of alienation and lost meaning of life. Someone to talk to, someone who listens with a soft heart and stays with you. Places where slow, open conversations can find place. And the fact that economic differences are increasing calls the Church to strengthen one of her traditional activities, fighting for justice and a dignified life for all people. I believe that this calls us as Church to renounce privileges, question all truths, share our benefits with others, and maybe even to shrink with joy and not with aggression. Then we will be free, and then we will grow. Grow in gentleness, patience, mercy, love, hope, all the values that Jesus set forth for us. Grow in the ability to tolerate and value and even love diversity, acknowledging that we do not belong together because we agree, but because we are one humanity and one creation, willed by the Creator, loved by the Creator. Grow in courage to take the consequences of this oneness and join the choir of people around the world who prays and works for just peace for human beings and the whole of creation. Grow in the ability to, but because looking at the lilies of the fields and the birds of the air can fill us with this inexplicable sense of belonging, being a small part of something great, belonging in a larger context, not having to carry the responsibility for our own happiness on our own shoulders, makes it possible to listen with a soft, open, resonant heart to nature and humans and to God. Under God's blessing, shaping the future. Thank you.
And now the second respondent, Professor Peter Kradochvil.
Sisters and brothers, dear Professor Rosa, thank you very much for this opportunity to address the General Assembly in response to Professor Rosa's fascinating speech. And I need to start by a personal confession. Having read the speech a couple of days ago, I could not stop thinking about the speech. You know, this very morning when I was having breakfast in the hotel, I could not decide whether I should or should not eat the scrambled eggs. And I thought, this is exactly what the paper was talking about, that we live in a knowledge society and we do not even know whether it's healthy for us to eat eggs or not, right? Every day we hear something else. People around me must have thought that I was having a heart attack because I was entirely frozen. But more seriously, I could not stop asking myself, why is it that the speech sounds so convincing and so familiar? And then it struck me, because the story, as you presented it, reminded me, and perhaps you as well, of the Christian story of salvation. Because it starts with describing the first model, the miserable state that we in Europe and globally as well find ourselves in. Misery that we all know from our own personal experience of how exhausted we feel, how insufficient, how always not good enough, and always on the verge of a mental collapse, of a burnout. Then you even escalate the point and you say that whole European societies are experiencing the same. This sense of never-ending competition, acceleration, alienation that you spoke about in one of your previous books. Chasing shadows, running, not knowing where. If you forgive me, the pun being in a black box, late modern societies have become unintelligible black boxes. And then in a third step, you even connect the societal level to the environmental crisis. We are not only destroying ourselves, but the very planet on which we live. So the whole of creation suffers a common misery and pain. And again, I was reminded of the biblical passage from the Romans, which you all know, that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth. And here your speech introduced the counter-narrative, the second model, your wonderful thesis about churches as communities of resonance, communities of listening, connection, transformation. And again, a personal remark, if you ever decide to give up your career as a sociologist, I think you would make a splendid theologian as well. So a problem of accelerating societies that have lost their direction, and against it, our churches as communities of resonance. Now, this is something I believe all of us in this hall like to hear. It is so pleasing to finally hear somebody, and especially somebody from the outside, to say that our churches are important, they are useful, they are a response to the problems our societies are facing. In short, that our churches are good, and by extension that we are good as well. But then I thought, isn't it perhaps a bit too pleasing? Is this really how things are with our churches? Or is it rather, which I think is what the underlying idea of your paper was as well, how things potentially could be? And this is why I was so glad to discover this short but very important cautionary sentence of yours in the paper, when you say, now I'll be quoting you with your permission, with my translation from German, when the church already knows what is right and what is wrong, and what exactly should come out of an encounter with the others, then it is not an institution of resonance anymore, but becomes a resonance killer. So this is a story not only of a salvific promise, but also a cautionary tale. And this is what I'd like to focus on in this short intervention, this ambivalence, this double-edged sword of Christianity-society nexus and the Christian influence in the world. a double nature which I think we need to acknowledge. Christianity offering places of encounter, surely, but also Christianity, or maybe a warped version of Christianity, as a source of aggression, of division, and even of destruction. And I believe there are at least two ways, which I'll present very briefly, in which this double potentiality can be addressed in relation to your argument. And first, perhaps controversially, I would like to rehabilitate a bit what you describe as loss of direction. And I would like to think more about your verdict that our late modern societies, they are accelerating, but they also have lost the sense of moving forward, accelerating without moving. But if the sense of moving forward was based on the idea of domination, of ever more consumption, of ever greater exploitation of our environment, isn't the loss of this direction in fact a blessing? Isn't standing still is a great thing, and if the direction is wrong, then losing direction, perhaps being at a loss, might be good in double measure, because only when somebody loses direction, traveling in a dark forest, for instance, only then will they look around, maybe for the first time in a long time, really look at where they are and what they have become along the way. So the loss of direction of our societies, in fact, might be, I would argue, a good thing in a certain sense. Those who are lost want to be found. Those who are cut off want to establish relationships. And that is where our churches can come in, but only if they are true places of encounter. And here comes my second question and second qualification, because if we look empirically at what has been labeled as the return of religious turn in international studies, or return of religion to the public arena in political philosophy, it is a mixed picture. If we look at what political actors have started to employ religious language in the public sphere, then sadly, and I'm not talking so much about churches, I'm talking about political leaders, it is sometimes those who want to rebuild exclusionary identities, those advocating new walls. So what do we see, to use a label employed by Roger Brubaker, is the rise of Christianism as a political tool and not of Christianity. So the return of religion to politics has had, to put it mildly, an ambivalent effect. Democracy needs religion. I very much agree with the title as well as the contents of your most recent book. But the misuse of religion can constitute a grave threat to democracy and peace as well. So I think this distinction between societies that have lost direction or sense of direction and churches that have not, so to speak, might be perhaps a bit too neat, and I would argue it needs to be carefully re-examined. In other words, I would argue that it is not only our societies that need to aufhören, to use this beautiful turn of phrase that you are using in the paper, to stop and listen up, but also our churches. And I think it is us as well who, from time to time, needs to stop and listen to the signs of the times, to discern where our churches stand, what they have become on the journey, and whether they are places of resonance or perhaps sometimes also resonance killers. And I'll conclude by asking, how do we know which category our communities belong to? That is the real question. And without giving a full answer, because I do not possess one in any case, I would like to suggest an initial litmus test. And this litmus test may be expressed by paraphrasing the first sentence of the famous pastoral constitution, Gaudium et Spes. Only if the joys and griefs of the people of this age, especially those who are poor and oppressed, those who are homeless and shunned, those who are despised and marginalized, only if their joys and griefs become the joys and griefs of our churches, then we are the followers of Christ. Then our churches become true places of listening, encounter, and transformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we have around 15 to 20 minutes for the discussion. And before we enter into the discussion, where I hope to propose at least one question, and then we also have some time for the audience. First, I have a duty to give a word back to Professor Rosa. Just if you want to say something to comment these two respondents, so push the mic on.
Yeah, I did.
Yes,
yeah.
Please. The word is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't want to take too much time now because I already spoke for very long, but thank you very much for these both comments. I really like both very much, and I think they raised really important points. I will just pick up two. Maybe I start with the last one. You made that very strongly, but you touched upon it too. It's absolutely true. I did not so much describe the churches as they are. Actually, that wasn't even my intention, right? But the churches as how I think they could and should be, right? The role they possibly could play. And the background is that when I came up, as you said, it's in my latest book, which is the basis of this, right? It's almost the basis is almost the same text, and. There I was talking to German people from German church in Würzburg, the bishop, and my impression was that they are so depressed that they really think no one wants to speak to us anymore. No one wants to listen, right? And the church is always on the defense. We are losing people. We had all these sexual abuse cases, right? So I wanted to say, well, look at what you have, right? So I just wanted to stress that point. But it's absolutely important when the Polity Press will do an English version of the book, but they asked me to consider this other side too, right? It's in my big resonance book. You're absolutely right. I think there is a huge danger of religion becoming resonance killer, right? Because, it's this what I say, it's a different form of being in the world, listening and responding. And this is for the vertical sense, what is at the core of our existence. But then it might turn around. Now we know it, right? As you said, right? We know what it is. And so that's killing vertical resonance. It's no longer listening, right? It's knowing and enforcing. And this is where it connects to political power. We have to kill the others. But it's interestingly, it's not just killing the vertical resonance. You touched on this strongly too. It's killing social resonance, right? God says, and therefore you have to live such and such and to not do. We know all the controversies on same-sex marriage and abortion and so on. And if the church says, I know what you have to do, you see this whole thing. You have to, right? That's killing social resonance. So I was describing the potentialities, not the realities. This is very important. But from what you said, you said that the church can be exactly this space where people recover this sense of resonance practically. I totally agree with this, but I think, this is something where I'm a little conservative, right? Which might not be the worst thing. At least not always, right? I think, rituals, for example, might be important, right? So it's not, because you could say in society we have psychology, for example. There you have spaces for listening and response, which is true, and I'm not arguing against psychology. But having this place, like what a church could be, as I said, even physically entering this space is different, right? And you have certain times, like the times of the service in Sunday, most of the time, for example, right? So this creates what I call dispositional resonance, right? Our bodies and mind can turn into this, go out of the mode of aggression into a state of resonance, right? And also these practices, like what I said, prayer or the Holy Communion, it depends on. So these rituals might somehow, they are always the same. I find this really interesting. That's what I meant with conservatism. There is no innovation in the Holy, do you call it communion also, right? Yeah. Or the main prayer. So it's always the same, but the idea is through the same we encounter the other, the total other, right? So I think maybe these rituals do have a role too, and also theology, right? Theology gives us an idea. I think if theology wants to be the truth, I find it almost laughable, right? But it's attempts of how can we think of a resonant existential form, right? Then I find it really most interesting, right? If it's a kind of suggestion, interpretation, inspiration, right? Okay.
Do you want to note something or to reply somehow, or shall we go further? Yeah, please, Bishop Kari. Yeah, push the mic on from the button there. I think it works now, yeah.
I think it's on now. Thank you. Yes, I really agree with you that the rituals and the rooms are very important. And as we see in Norway, very many people still, they want to take part in the rituals connected to a new baby is born, a youth is celebrating the confirmation, someone is getting married, and when they die. These are very important rituals that connect people, and I think also open this room for resonance. So I truly agree with that. I also think that psychologists can be a place where people can come and speak, but they are so busy. They are overloaded. And if you come to church, you might meet someone that have more time and that can stay with you for a longer time. You don't need a doctor to write a prescription to you that you need a psychologist. You can just go there and you can meet someone with a listening heart. Then we have to practice to have listening hearts. Yes.
You also want to make a short reply, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Push the button on, up, yeah. Now it works.
No, because we have a round of conservative confessions here. So my dimension that I would add, which I find essential for being in the church community, is also the material aspect, right? Even the walk to the service, then being in the building. This morning during the prayer, one of the strongest moments for me is shaking hands, because then you really not only talk about embracing and touching others, but really getting into contact. So I think there are many fundamental aspects that cannot be easily replaced by psychotherapy or by virtualization. So I agree, and that's an essential role the church has.
Yeah, thank you. I also find your treatment and the concept of resonance really fascinating, as you are really addressing all the issues and the problems that philosophy has done for centuries, and all these basic phenomena, alienation and these all other like flaws you were addressing. There is a great tradition to discuss all these issues. And I was thinking to challenge you a bit. When we think about this concept of resonance, it sounds very good. It sounds something very kind of like therapeutical. But I was thinking about a short story by German writer Thomas Mann. And the title of that short story was Mario and the Magician. Mario und der Zauberer. Yeah. And the point there was very simple. There was an artist of circus in the middle of that story who was trying to enchant his audience by giving to his audience all kinds of emotional like feelings, by trying to create a certain type of resonance between the audience and the artist. But the problem was in this short story, that this artist wasn't the best person. He was evil. Yeah. And this short story has become a symbol of how dictatorships work. But you could also read it as a criticism of populism. Dictatorships or all kinds of forms of populism, they are also trying to create certain moods, certain feelings. They are addressing our emotions, also by creating a certain type of resonances. So is resonance always good? Because we are actually seeing that this resonance is everywhere around us, and everyone, or at least some certain kind of powers, are also trying to address us by creating these resonances. How do you make a difference between this good resonance and this resonance full of shadows?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I think this is a really important question. And when I came up with this idea of resonance, when I heard this type of challenge the first time, I was almost giving up. I thought, okay, forget about resonance. It doesn't work, right? Because as you said, right, or you made the point. Someone said, well, think of the German Nazis, right? Weren't they very good in resonance, right? With the uniforms, the songs, the fires, and so on, right? Creating a strong space of resonance. And I thought, okay, if that's true, then forget about it. But I really think and then I thought for it for a long time, and I really think now I think I've solved the problem. Right? Because for me, what the Nazis or what right-wing populism does, it clearly plays on the yearning for resonance. Right? People yearn for this resonance in a double sense of the community, and also having the voice of the leader in that case with which you can resonate, right? But what is created there is not a space of resonance, but a space of echo. I call it an echo chamber, right? Because you really clearly see conceptually, and there I think I'm close to the theological ideas, resonance is keeping a duality, right? I listen to some uncontrollable other, which is certainly not the same. Resonance requires difference. It's not harmony. I mean, look, if two meet and we totally agree, it's not resonance, right? The conversation becomes resonance if we struggle, right? Listening to someone who says differently and thinks differently. So keeping the difference, right, and even the distance is essential for resonance. Resonance is hearing some other, answering it and being transformed in the process. Now what the Nazis did, for example, right, is the exact opposite. There should only be one voice, right? It should be the same, and if you somehow think or feel or look or love differently, you should immediately be expelled. That's the whole, and look at, I mean, the right-wing populists in Europe, sometimes they call themselves identitarian. We have to be pure, stay the same. There is no idea of transformation. It's really the idea there's only one voice, and it's the voice of the leader, and everything within me that is not in agreement with it is bad, right? So how could that be resonance? It's clearly echo. And you see it really with Trump's speech. I found this really interesting. You should read it in 2016 when he accepted being a candidate for the Republican Party, right? That was a really good speech, at least as far as I read it. Probably he didn't write it himself, right? And he said, those in the Rust Belt who are not seen, those in Detroit, in the decaying city, who are forgotten, right? Those who are left out and lost, I am your voice. This was the climax. It was very strong, right? But look at what he says. He does not say, I give you a voice, I make you heard, I include you. He says, I am your voice. That literally means shut up. From now on, I am in your voice. Therefore, I think this is echo, it's not resonance. And of course, you can manipulate resonance, but you know, if I just try to elicit applause, for example, right, then I'm closed. I'm not touched and transformed. I try to manipulate you. It's another question which is very difficult. How can you distinguish the one from the other?
Yes.
This is sometimes very difficult.
Do you have the criteria, or is it always like kind of a hidden
I think,
somehow?
Yeah, I think, sometimes it seems as if it's merely subjective, but I think it's not, right? If you have cameras in a room, for example, right? Let's say the two of us talk, right? And I say, it was such a resonant talk, right? And you say, well, Mr. Rosa never really listened to me, right? He just made his point, right, for example. And then I think you could judge that from the outside with a camera. Was there mutual transformation? Was there listening and response? Was there natality? Or was Rosa just saying what you always said, right? Being completely deaf to the arguments of the other. So I think you could judge it from the outside.
Okay, dear audience, we now have time for, I think, one question or maybe two very short questions. So I'm really sorry.
I'm really sorry.
There is someone behind the mic, so she's going to be, or he, yeah, he's going to be the first, I'm afraid. So yeah, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Rosa and the other members of the panel for your presentation today. I have two questions, one for Assembly that will remain unanswered and one for the panel that I hope to hear an answer. The Church believed in growth and economic success. Its models, whether established or free church, were and are designed to bring growth to the Church and economic success. However, the Church has been in decline for many generations in Europe. Decline in attendance, engagement, conversion, baptism, and now financially. I wonder what the Church has learned about dying to progress and growth. Indeed, have we learned anything about living differently, or do we continue to be aggressively positioned against decline? What might it look like to position ourselves differently? That's to the Assembly. And what might be the first steps for the Church to become resonant to our history, our present, and our future, and how might that become our witness to our world? Thank you.
So, their discussions, Professor Rosa, you want to make a short reply?
Yeah, I found this a very interesting observation too. I think you're right in a twofold sense, right? The connection between church and growth. On the one hand, if you think of evangelical movements, for example, right, they really literally promise economic success. I mean, we know this from Protestantism and from Max Weber, right? So actually, theology and churches were clearly connected to Europe's Model 1, even by being a motivational factor individually and collectively. And what is maybe even more interesting, right, is that, of course, and I think that's what you also said, the churches themselves somehow run on a model of dynamic stabilization, right? Like if you think of Christianity with the idea of spreading the word outward, right? It's dynamic stabilization, proving its stability and viability by growing, moving outward, increasing the horizon of attainability, availability, accessibility. So the thought I have by listening to your argument, which I find very interesting, is it's really true. Maybe the church, since the churches right now are no longer capable of stabilizing, at least in Europe, stabilizing themselves dynamically, they might be kind of the first to experience it, to come up with they are forced to come up with a different mode of being in the world and to the world. So maybe in that sense they might be the innovators in this sense.
Okay, and now we have time for two more questions. So first, the person who is standing behind the number 3, please.
I'm Vilmos Fischer from Hungary. Thank you very much, Professor Rosa, your lecture. My question is, you mentioned several times this expression that common good, publicum bonum. In your interpretation, what does it mean, common good? Common good. What does it mean? You used it several times.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I'm also happy to hear the others. Yeah, I mean, the common good, as you know, the Gemeinwohl in German, the idea is that we somehow can define a good which is not an individual good, but which is good for the community, for all of us, so to speak, right? And we have realized in social theory that you cannot define these in terms of substance, right? You cannot say that having that kind of belief is good for everyone, or even having that kind of economic structure is good for everyone or so. So my idea is we should realize that it's impossible to define the common good, what is good for the body politic, for the community, right, in substantive terms. This is why I want to define it in relational terms, right? The common good is not a certain form of belief and maybe even a certain form of institutional structure, but it's a form of relationship, right? The common good, what is good for everyone, if relationship between citizens are resonant, if relationship between citizens and institutions are resonant, if the relationship of this society with nature is resonant, and if it has a kind of sense of resonance with history, right? So I want to kind of define the common good as the idea of good for everyone, not in substantive terms, but in relational terms in all aspects. That's the idea behind this. Because a lot of social theorists, they forget about common good. There is no common good. There's just individual or group particular interests.
And the lady there, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Rosa. I'm Maria Augustóttir from Iceland. The freedom of the cell made me think of the COVID period. That was the freedom of the cell for many of us. Europe and the whole world stood still. We cleansed up in our homes and maybe in our souls, and what do I know. But as soon as it was over, everything just got the same pace as before. And I was so confused because I was hoping, and now I'm to blame as anyone else because I haven't done anything about this, but I was hoping that COVID would teach us something, would teach us how important the shaking of hands is, and maybe we feel it, but I think we have not spoken of it. We avoid talking about COVID, like somebody said yesterday, because we are so happy it's over, but we can learn so many things from this period, and I think it has a direct connection to this wonderful lecture. I would like to order it in German, please. The question is it too late, or can we still, as churches, do something about this, like learning from the COVID time? What do we take from it? How do we do it? in close connection to the new servant of theology, which is sociology, of course. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question too. I mean, I totally agree with you. I was very optimistic. I mean, basically I was optimistic at the beginning of COVID, exactly along the lines you suggest. I thought, okay, this is now a standstill, historically almost unique, right? We have never had that in modernity, that so much stopped. It was clearly a shrinking of the horizon of availability, attainability, accessibility, like the Korean students in prison, right, for a moment. So I thought, okay, if the chains of interaction break, this is the moment where the new can start. That was my hope. And then I had the same disappointment as you, right? As we went back as quickly as possible, and now it almost looks like it was already forgotten, right? But as you say, I think let's wait a little, right? Because it's to be a kind of social in society, it's a kind of universal thing. If there is ontological insecurity, that is to say, if our basic form of life is shaken, and COVID did shake it, right? For me, it was a monster of uncontrollability, right? Modernity is geared towards gaining control over the world, and all of a sudden something comes along which we cannot see, cannot hear, cannot touch, cannot smell. It's invisible and deadly dangerous, right? It really shakes our form of being in the world up to the point, you know, I mean, the Resonance book has 800 pages, right? It starts with breathing the world in and breathing it out. That's what we do all the time. This is how we connected with the world. And even at that level, COVID created a crisis, right? It was a monster of uncontrollability. And if something like that happens, shaking ontological security, then you can really see that people turn conservative, right? They try to go back to the old stage as fast as possible. But once they are there, they reflect on, oh, wait a minute, what exactly happened here, right? And therefore, I think maybe it will come back, because, and then we will think about what exactly was it, how did we get into the crisis, and how did we experience it? Because what I find most interesting is that the plague, you know, the Black Death, right? The plague, the epidemics, in the 14th century, for some, or even in the 13th century, it went for a long time, for people like Egon Friedel or Hans Blumenberg, or Marianne Gronemeyer, was the start of modernity, of modernization, which happened 300 or 400 years later, right? So the consequences of the plague were very long-term in extension. So maybe it's not too late, right? Maybe we can think of how could it be different, right? But it means that the standstill we experienced there, we should not just interpret it as a kind of accident, as an enforced slowdown, but as a slowdown which opens up the possibility of a different form of being in the world. Yes. So there's still time for hope.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for these questions. Unfortunately, our time is up now. For the very, very conclusion, I want to just ask a very short, minor personal question from Professor Rosa. You're also an organist. You play organ. Has this background in music something to do with this concept of resonance? Did you find it by playing organ, or from music, or what's the source of that finding?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is that, I mean, obviously resonance is a musical term, right? And the organ was, you know, I did not grow up Christian. My parents were Christian, and then they left the church and they turned Hindus and esoteric, right? And it was the organ which really kind of brought me back. I don't know how that happened. Even as a pupil, I was a pupil at that time, right? And I could not walk past the church when the organ was playing. I went in there and said, I want to learn that, right? So clearly there is resonance coming through that. So I would actually say it was one of the sources for the concept.
I really hope that you will have a time here in Tallinn to play somewhere.
I'm a lousy player, and I don't play... And I don't always play according to the tunes. I was in a rock band for a long time, so I mix.
Rocking with organ sounds fantastic. Okay, now thank you very much for these presentations. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Thanks to you.
I will have little gifts for you, but please also for minutes or two organizers would also like to make a short announcement. So, yeah, please.
Thank you, Jonas, and thank you for moderating this exciting session. I think a good new building block for our deliberations. That's how I see it, at least. A few domestic issues and some procedural issues that we need to give our attention this afternoon. There are workshops happening this afternoon. Workshops where you have an opportunity to talk together about what you've been listening to this morning and to bring in your own experiences and share your reflections upon this morning session. You may sit down. You may sit down. You don't have to stand up.
No, we want to stand.
Okay, all right. Stand up. Stand up for Jesus, as we say. So workshops, all of you who are going to workshops, and that's the vast majority of you, will meet here in the black box at 2 o'clock. And then you may wonder, what does he mean when he says 2 o'clock? I mean 2 o'clock, sharp. Okay? We're running a little bit late now because we started a little bit late. We don't want that to happen again. 2 o'clock is 2 o'clock is 2 o'clock. That will be fine this afternoon, I'm sure. Those of you who are not going to the workshops, and they are the people who are in the Assembly Nomination Committee meeting. It's not a lot of you, but we are some. We'll meet at 2 o'clock. You know what that means, huh? 2 o'clock in the terrace hall. In the terrace hall. Ask a steward if you don't know where it is. I need to, so it's okay if you also have to ask. Terrace hall at 2 o'clock, the Assembly Nominations Committee meeting. They will come up with suggestions for the committees of the Assembly. The names that will be associated with the committees as suggestions will be published in hard copies, old school, on walls and, like we did in the old days. They will also be emailed to delegates and they will be online on the SharePoint. So no excuse for not seeing them, okay? So that was the second, 2 o'clock, Terrace Hall, the Nomination Committee meeting. Third announcement and the last. Tonight at 9 o'clock, it will still be bright outside. There's a guided tour of Tallinn. And you heard me this morning speaking warmly about walking in the old city. So I think this is something for you. Sign up before your neighbor because there are only, I hear, 40 spaces for that. It's only 40 people who can have this particular special treatment. It's free and you sign up at the registration desk and that's also where you meet at 9 o'clock tonight if you are so lucky to get a place for this one. Here ends domestic issues. I call on Beate Fagerli to do the midday prayer before we go to... Oh, sorry, Berit. It is Berit. But it's the same church. But then it's okay. Berit, please, midday prayer. Thank you.
But before, one more applause.
Yes.
I will have this
Sorry.
short gift. Small gift. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Please turn to page 30 in the worship book.